Hey guys, it's Shue here, and today we're going to talk about how do you increase the dynamic range of your files in post. Obviously this scene here was very contrasting. I was unable to capture all of the information of the trees and the mountain and this beautiful sky all at once. You've done it all the time. If you make a proper exposure for the mountains, the sky is gone. And if you make a proper exposure for the sky, the mountain's gone. So if we go into the develop module, you'll see that I've got all that details there. All those mountains and trees are right there. However, I cannot keep my sky information, right, if I expose for the trees. So what do you do? Well, you use Photoshop, and we're going to use a luminosity mask to work with this. However, we're going to be working with smart objects, and the reason why we're going to use smart object is we get to use the nice camera raw converter inside Photoshop. So what we're going to do is we're going to right click on this file, and we're going to say edit in, and we're going to open it as smart object. Let me come up here and click on it. Maybe you can see that setting. Edit in, open as smart object in Photoshop. So there we have it. That's that quick. So now what we're going to do is we're going to double click on this, okay? And what we're going to do is we're going to adjust it so that all of the shadow information is the way we want it to look. So obviously I'm going to take my blacks, I'm going to open them up some. I'm going to take my shadows, I'm going to open them up some. I'm going to take the exposure, I'm going to push it up. And just until I can see the mountains the way I want it to see. Might be able to, heck, I could even pump up the vibrance just a bit, I guess. But mainly I'm worried about how these trees look. We can increase the contrast here. No, I'll do that later. I'll set the contrast at 0. I won't even touch the contrast. I'll do that overall on the image. We open it up just a hair more. Okay. So now I can see the mountains look, they look pretty good, and I can see the trees, they look fine. So I'm going to click OK. Now, what's going to happen here. If we make one of these copies for our shadows and one for the highlights, this will happen. There's several ways you can duplicate the layer. You can hit Control J or Command J, and when you open it up, and say now if we try to expose for the sky, now the sky looks good, so we save it. Look what happens. Both copies are exactly the same. So I'm going to Control Z or Command Z to undo that. Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and delete this layer. Okay, because we do not want it. What we want to do is to create a copy, a separate copy of this smart object. So if you right click, don't right click here on this box where all this smart object information is. Right click over here in the box, and it'll say new smart object via copy. Let me slide this over here so we can see it. Right click, new smart object via copy. So what that does is that creates a copy of the smart object that's independent. So we're going to open that in Camera Raw. Okay, and this time we'll pull our exposure down and get our sky the way we want. Maybe I'll pop up this clarity a little bit. Maybe I'll actually pull the shadows, see how these highlights work here. Maybe I'll open up the highlights a little bit, make the clouds look a little more natural. Okay, maybe my exposure. That looks pretty good. I like that. Sky looks pretty good. Remember, I'm going to do an overall adjustment to the image at the end, so I don't want it to be the complete the sky exactly how I want it to look. Let me just take one more look here, play with these controls. Alright, that looks pretty good. So I click OK. Now I've got two copies. Okay, I've got a copy for the sky, and I got a copy for the mountains. Alright, now this is what we're going to do. We're going to go to the Channels menu. Okay, let me go back to my layers for a second. I'm just going to disable that. With the top layer selected, I'm going to go to the channels, okay? And I'm going to hold down the Control key, which is the Command key on a Mac, and I'm going to load a luminosity mask, okay? So basically I just loaded all of the highlight information by holding down the Control key. See, if you hold down the Control key, you get the little box, and you click on the RGB layer, and it's going to select all the highlights. If you haven't seen my luminosity mask tutorial, check it out. If you want an action, I can give you my action for luminosity masks. Okay, so we're going to go back to our layers, and since this top layer is selected, if we hit a layer mask, it's going to create it. Now watch what happens when I turn it on. Right? Now we've got our sky information in there, although it's a little bit grayed out. If you zoom in a little bit, let's zoom in. it looks a little bit funky the way it's laid over top of the mountains and stuff. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to go in and blur this mask. So with the mask selected, we're going to go Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. Okay. Let me slide this down here so we can see the difference. So if I bring this blur up, see how the clouds started to pop some more? Okay, so let me show you the before and the after. So you can see there's a lot more detail in that ridge line and in the clouds. So we select OK. So now that we've got our sky information the way we want, and we've got the mountains and the trees the way we want, we're going to finish off our image. We're going to grab a curves adjustment. Maybe I'll pull down a little bit on the shadows, and maybe I can even pull down on the highlights if I wanted to. Okay, something like that. So that's it. I'll hit File, Save, and it'll save that file right back to the Lightroom catalog. Okay, so it's done saving. Let's look inside Lightroom, and there it is. Okay, now remember, this is that same file. It's a PSD. It's a lossless file, so we can always open it back in Photoshop and readjust any of those layers. They're all intact. There's the before image. Now let's look and see if we try to do the exposure here. If I try to open up those mountains to that point, and then I take the highlights and I bring that down, and I bring the whites down, and you know, I can't get that same kind of effect. Okay, so there it is. That's the one that we did with the luminosity masks, and this is the one in Lightroom. We just can't get the same effects, guys. I would say the trees got more detail, the mountains got more detail, and then we can process this inside Lightroom if we want. We can bump a little clarity on there. We could take our shadows and open them up just a hair, right? We could take our vibrance and kick it up some, right? We can take our contrast and bump it up some. We could do all things we want. We can open it up or drop it down. So that's it. I want to thank you all for taking time to visit today, and until next time, we'll see you soon.